Where's your pole, George?
We are in Braunston. It's a snow day.
We've been in Braunston about a week. We came up a week ago.
Yeah. Came up and went to the Admiral Nelson to have a little Christmas meal with some of the other boat tubers.
Which was really nice, but we didn't film anything. No, but everyone else is really professional and dedicated, and we're just like turning up for the lunch.
Yeah. Basically, we were just like, food?
So we've been in Braunston a week,
Yeah.
and we didn't plan to stay this long, but it's pretty ideal.
Other than for cell phone service.
Yeah, but like there's a shop just up the hill, there's a bus to Daventry.
It's a pretty good location for us to get we got the chimney done, and we're
Chimney video link below.
trying to get some work done on the hatch that may or may not happen.
Yeah, so we like Braunston, and today we woke up and there's a white blanket of snow everywhere, which is pretty, but problematic. Didn't enjoy the snow blizzard in my face walking the dog.
No, and our hatch, when the snow begins to melt, our hatch will leak like a sieve. We are actually frozen in. There is ice all around us and everything, and we're not going to do any ice breaking. Somebody was doing some yesterday and made quite a hell of a racket.
Hopefully at some point the weather will get a little bit milder and we'll move on.
Yeah.
So about a month ago we did a video where we talked about the CRT consultation, the survey that we had to fill in, and it was really interesting just for us to talk it through, but then on the video we had so many comments, which were also really interesting to read because there were perspectives that we hadn't really considered before, and like hearing the opposite side to our opinion was really interesting, and just variations on that. And so we wanted to do a follow-up, but also the deadline for the survey is 1 week tomorrow, and whatever your opinion is, like, it's really important if you get a say, if you've got a license, to fill in the survey and get it back.
The deadline's the 18th of December. If you've got a license and you've got the link to the survey and you haven't filled it out, do go and do so. From what we've heard, about a third of all license holders have responded so far. Which
is actually apparently pretty good for these things. But
yeah, but it'd be better to hear from everybody. You know, the interesting thing was that I can't say that there was anything that was asked that sort of changed my mind.
You mean in the comments?
Yeah, on anything specific. But there was some perspectives that I hadn't taken into account. You know, one of the things that was asked was just related to boats that never leave a marina. Should they be actually exempt from having, to pay a license at all? And I've been thinking about it, and with my overriding metaphor for most of this is that basically it's the same thing as having a car, right? I mean, you're accessing the canals, which are equivalent to a road, on a transportation network that is, relatively small, but it still exists. If you've got a vehicle and the government requires it to be licensed, but you're not going to be using it on anything, you're either not using it at all or it's not being used on anything but your own property, then you're able to avoid paying a license because you're not using the shared resources. And that actually makes a lot of sense. But there is this kind of weird thing of, as far as I know, the marinas have to pay a fee to have the water. It's kind of weird, but water is typically not legally owned by the landowner. It's you own the land and you own the land under it, but the water that accumulates on it is part of the water table. And it basically belongs to everybody. It's called riparian rights. So what I guess I'm trying to say is that it's not really the same as having a car that's not going to be operated unless your boat is sitting on the bottom, right? If you've sunk your boat, then you shouldn't have to pay for a license.
Well, that would be a bit cruel anyway.
We did see this boat that is landlocked. Basically, somebody has dug a trench, pulled their boat into the trench, backfilled the trench, and they have a boat sitting in a tiny little pond on their property. And as far as I know, they wouldn't have to pay for a license because their boat isn't on...
The water's not connected to the network.
Yeah, and so effectively, the water, if it drains out of that pond, he just, or she, I don't really know, has a boat that's sitting on the ground, and they own the ground, so it's fine. And they can avoid having license because they don't have continuous access to the water. And I guess my thing is even if you're you're in a marina and you never actually leave the marina, that again comes down to the choice thing. You've made that choice, but the choice itself was already contingent on, you've got a boat, it's in the water, it's subject to licensing. It's like, I'm alive, I'm subject to taxation. Death will occur and taxes will too. And there's an argument for why neither shouldn't, which is, it's like you're part of a society. And so when you've bought into a boat, you're in this society of people who are utilizing the water and like the riparian concerns that are owned by the collective. They're owned by the country, not by the individual people sitting along the shore. And so that's good. I mean, it advantages you if you choose to get out of the marina, because now you can travel
wherever you want.
Yeah, and you can constantly be beside people's private property, but you're on a public right-of-way. And because that right-of-way is the water, it's also the land underneath it, but the water is the key resource to the fact that you're floating. I sort of understand why the legal argument is that if it's in the marina, you're still floating on communal water, so you have to pay for that communal water.
It's personal choice, and I'm sure there's people that do this, but I don't understand why you would buy a boat and never leave the marina anyway. Like, you've got a boat, travel.
I sort of do, because like when we were on the Basingstoke, for instance, there's those grandfathered in houseboats. A houseboat isn't capable of navigation right from the bat.
You want to be by the water.
And on the water, I mean, like, one of the things I love about being on the boat is how well I sleep compared to on land. Like, there's no vibrations. There's always a sense of, you always feel sort of at peace somehow.
Really?
I do, yeah. I mean, well, you're worried about it sinking, but I'm thinking about the fact that if it sinks rapidly right now, it's going to go down 8 inches. We're still going to be above water. Then, there was a lot of observations of the idea that the scheme where people walk around and read your license plate is
completely inefficient.
Yeah, is crazy, and that there should be some technological solution.
Which is true. Like, in this day and age, with the resources that are available, why are people doing such a manual task over such a wide spread area?
Yeah, and yet if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that isn't an area of expertise. There's expertise available in this technology, but the fact that like it doesn't really fit in with the historical goals or how does it relate to taking care of locks? How does it relate to taking care of
all these kind of physical like
assets? Like there's this whole thing that the Canal and River Trust is dealing with in terms of, apparently it's like the third largest like heritage property custodian. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Like, there's the church, I guess there's the National Trust, the Church and of England, and the Canal and River Trust, or something in that order. Probably got some of that wrong, but there's this. It's England. There's a really large number of listed properties. There's a really large number of unlisted but still, relevant historical properties. They need to be managed as, like there's the ones that are not fit for continuous use, and those need to be managed as, museums or whatever they're going to be, or just, archaeological sites. But then there's also ones that need to be rented to people and need to be run as a tenancy type thing.
Yeah, and all the administration that goes along with that.
Right. So you got this, you've got all of these areas of concern that
need to be prioritized, and I guess developing a way of tracking boats is just not.
Well, yeah, because it's not exactly...
It's not a quick fix, it's not an easy win,
No, and it's a problem that involves some understanding of computer technology and sort of the state of computer technology. I mean, this is one of my areas. There definitely are ways of setting up an ecosystem of essentially web cameras and barcode scanners, where you could have people walking along scanning with a barcode scanner. You could have those barcode scanners sitting at bridges, and as the boat went by, it would do it. You could even do this without ever introducing any of that stuff and requiring people to have things on their boat by simply using like machine learning and a bunch of databases and stuff to effectively photograph everything traveling on the canals and just identify them all, track them all. And then once you've been able to link that tracking to, you know, an owner by the boat name or something through a human agent going, yes, I see them on video. I see this, you know, I've caught you here, here, and here, and here. You know, no problem. You know, there are other concerns. You've got the Big Brother aspect.
Yeah, which
you know.
people push back on, they don't like. But then they don't like not being spotted and having issues with their license.
Right, so it's like a catch-22. The automated system does make a great deal of sense. And the expertise is out there. There's size of text. There's QR codes. There's all sorts of ways you could make it so that you could passively do it. There's also ways you could actively do it. A company could do this and sort of create a little transmitter that you glue to the top of your boat, and it sends an SMS to a database every so often.
And then talking of license fees, why not give a discount to people that, you know, agree to have this?
Yeah, that would be one way of doing it, right? I mean, the license fees themselves are something that seems to be a very contentious issue, and a lot of people seem to put a focus on it, but it's like, it's not really the biggest thing, you know?
Well, people that pay the license often seem to be dissatisfied with how the money's spent, and yet the biggest income for the CRT is not through boat licensing.
No, like we make up a small portion of it.
There's a lot of misperceptions.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that I think gets me is like we got questions about things like, you know, why doesn't the CRT pull boats out of the water if they're in this terrible condition that we're talking about? And there are boats that are in terrible condition. So, well, the CRT isn't a police force. It doesn't have police capabilities or police powers, and it probably shouldn't have police powers. There's this priority problem of like, what is the highest priority? Mm. And being able to continue to pay for the ongoing maintenance and everything ultimately never was the burden of the people who wouldn't pay for licenses. It never was the burden of people who refused to pay for their BSS, you know.
That's another thing. Why, like, the BSS should be linked to the license. Like, you shouldn't be able to get a license unless you've, you know.
Yeah, and that should be automated.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's another point of automation.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that those things technologically don't talk to each other. So you have to show a piece of paper saying, here's a BSS to your insurance company, you know, who probably asked for a fax, because that's still a thing. There were a lot of people who still were talking about the wide beam, narrow beam thing. They were like, well, wide beam should pay less because they use less resources, because they cannot access as much of the canal
see, that's
system.
the flip side. We were saying wide beam should pay more because they use more water, they use more area on the canal. But yeah, there's a whole section that they can't go on because there's narrow lock. So so you could argue that they should pay less because there's less available to them.
Yeah.
But then that's the choice you make when you
right.
Like when you buy a 70-foot narrowboat, you make the choice that you're not going to go on, I don't know which canals.
Yeah, there's a bunch of places.
So
you're automatically choosing to not go down that thing. So should you pay less because you're not getting that tiny little arm?
And does that mean that shorter boats, like 40-foot boats, should pay more because they can go everywhere?
Right. And that's, you know, I mean, the problem with it is it still comes down to it's a choice. You're making a choice. Somebody had the sensitivity to, you know, ask whether or not a fat person should have to pay more for the NHS. And it's like, well, the difference is that when you're sitting out to purchase your body at, you know, I don't know, birth, you don't look forward 40 years and say, you know what I really want is a 300-pound fatty, right? Like that's what I'm aiming for. You don't go, that's the direction that I want to go in. You're not making an affirmative choice to go there. You're making a series of small choices which ultimately may lead to worse health outcomes. If everybody who was a boater was just not even gifted, but like, yeah, you walked outside one morning and a randomly supplied boat had fallen on you. Well, not on you, in front of you. And this was now the only boat you were ever going to have, and you got a wide beam. Well, darn. Now you can't travel to the narrow parts of the canal. Now you have a reason for saying, well, wait a minute, I shouldn't maybe pay as much as the person who was gifted a narrow beam. But because you actually make a purchase choice, and this is something, it's like, I come from America. We've got people that drive trucks that are bigger than wide beams. And when they choose to buy that, they choose not to go down tiny little lanes like you find in England. There are no tiny little lanes like that in, the craziest country on earth. But there are, places you can't go with these enormous vehicles. And there's also places you can't go when you buy a Prius. So it's like your choices limit your outcomes, but the person who buys a Prius shouldn't pay less for their vehicle license than the person who buys a Unimog, because the two of them, have different capabilities to drive out into the middle of the Gobi Desert.
Interesting.
That's my take on it. So I do see the problem, and there are other points to it, because a lot of people are right. When it comes down to it, there's no reason to believe that a wide beam is going to use more of the water. The space in the water is what's being taken up by the boat. And if you've chosen a larger boat, you're taking up a larger amount of space. Yes, you can't travel to the same number of places, but that's the Gobi Desert versus your Prius. There were a lot of people who, to a certain point, agreed with me on the bias that was in the question, but I think they went a little bit of a step further. They outright don't like or don't trust the idea of this charity and its process. There was some question about, for instance, the fact that they're charities. Aren't they supposed to work towards some good cause? And it's like, well, no, they're a non-profit. They're a charity and a non-profit are the same thing, legally, right? But they're not like, I don't know, the March of Dimes in America, or what's a charity? The Red Cross. Cancer research, any of those things in which you give money towards, you donate money towards a good outcome. It's not like a church charity where they're
raising money to fix their roof.
Right. It's effectively a non-profit. It can take in income, and it is legally required to not basically make a profit off of that income. It has to spend that income on its domain of concern. And I don't think there's a reasonable argument to say that they're not spending the money on the concern being maintained.
People are always going to be saying that
there's waste.
There's waste, and also they're not doing the job that I want them to do, like the lock that affects me, or the towpath that affects me.
Or there's should they be getting six-figure salaries, the people who run the thing? And it's like, well, if they're bringing in more than six figures, then if
you want to attract the caliber of person that can manage the organisation, then that's what they cost. That's what the market dictates that you have to pay.
Yeah, and the reality is that the same person taking the same type of job for a non-profit, like for a for-profit, employer, could make quite a bit more. Because you take a job with a non-profit and you're getting paid X number of pounds, and you could take the same skill set and the same knowledge and go out and take a job in the private sector for X plus number of pounds, that difference that discount is what you're providing to the nonprofit, probably because you care.
Yeah, otherwise why would you do it? If you were just purely motivated by money, you'd go and get the private.
You'd go get the money somewhere else where there's more money.
You just don't know, do you? You don't know what's going on.
No, and that opacity is kind of the problem.
Oh, that's what I was going to say as well. So this 3-stage consultation process.
Yeah.
So the second stage was with license holders, and a certain number of people were invited to the meetings. Yeah,
and apparently not that many people showed up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Not many people who applied to go. This is just what I've heard. It might not be true. So a lot of people applied to go to the meetings. Only a certain number of people got invited because of space, I guess. And then not all of those showed up. So you're getting a really limited representation of views, which is a real shame.
So if you're physically here and you're on the canals, you really quickly start to realize that there is this very vibrant community of very diverse people
with this similar interest.
Who have this similar interest. And it can range in aid.
And there's a whole economic range as well. And generally everyone will talk to everyone. We've got a middle of the range boat, so maybe we don't see it from the extremes, but yeah, everyone talks to everyone.
Yeah, and this community is highly opinionated, but also really passionate. Positive, very passionate. Yeah. And that's where what I've heard from a bunch of people is, well, the CRT is staffed by people who aren't boaters.
People are making assumptions. You don't actually know. We've met staff that have boats a few times.
And we've met people who are liveaboards, and we've heard of certainly lots of people who are involved in everything from licensing to lock keeping to everything, who've spent decades in this community. So you've got people who are from old boating blood, I guess.
That's another thing you hear, people saying that the canals aren't like they used to be, maybe 30 years ago. And it's well, the cities aren't like they used to be 30 years ago. The towns aren't like they used to be 30 years ago. Everything changes. You can't
keep them.
Nothing stays the same. It's the nature of life. So sure, it might not be as friendly as it was. I don't know what it was like 30 years ago. It might be a lot busier. There might be more rules and regulations, but that's life. Everything's continually changing, and it's just going to happen. You've just got to accept it and roll with it. And at the end of the day, everybody who lives on the canal or works on the canal or visits the canal wants the same outcome. They want a usable environment resource.
Yeah, and that is still very much available. There are places where it is under strain. We're cruising around a section of the canal right now where, during the busy times there's quite a bit of traffic, but at no point is it unable to move type thing. At no point is it a major health and socioeconomic concern, whereas this is true in the large population areas. So, but these things exist, and this is the idea of the canals weren't the same 30 years ago. It's 30 years ago, were the canals the same as they were 30 years before that, when they were full of mud and hadn't been cleaned up, and
100 years before that, when they were full of workboats,
right,
and people were trying to make a living.
Yeah, one of the things that I always find funny about politics is that the conservative impulse to try and keep things the same is kind of fundamentally incapable of doing things in a universe that's expanding and rotating, right? And we're talking about living on water. It doesn't stay in the same condition day in and day out.
Looking back with rose-tinted glasses as well, and thinking that it was much better when I bet there was lots of things that weren't as good.
It was way better when the side of the boat was lined with horse manure. If you're a license holder, make your opinions known.
Whatever your opinion is. Coming
into this community, this is actually the first community I feel like I've ever joined. I've always been this black sheep who's just shown up and been bah! And, and everybody else is bah! And I'm bah! We might have to cut that bit. But the thing is I've always shown up to any of these things in my life, all of these experiences, as I've gone to India, as I've gone to Nepal, as I've been in Vietnam, I would show up and get a high-level overview relatively rapidly, but I'm still never experiencing it. I never got to experience India as an Indian.
No.
We started watching these videos, and it's that looks interesting. Then you get here, and you're just wow, this is unique.
And then you actually become part of it. You're not an outsider. You are just another boater, and
with another set of opinions about toilets.
Yeah.
And there's an innumerable number of them. And
everyone is happy to talk to you. We've met yesterday alone, we had 3 separate interactions with 3 different people, and they were all extended good interactions.
Yeah, and this is not including all the people who just say hi with the walking on the dog. This is people who
everyone that says hello that you see.
I never had a community, and in most of my life I've never had what I would describe as community since leaving a small town in the middle of nowhere long time ago. Being on these boats, it's amazing how often you'll see the same boat that you haven't seen in 3 months, and it's how you doing. I guess what I'm saying is that everybody I've met, including the people who aren't on the canals yet but are following us along and going, I want to get there, I want you to get there. I really do. I think this is amazing, and it's a wonderful life. And it's hard. It's got its learning curve and a half, and there's trying to figure out how to live in a narrower space and divest yourself of a whole bunch of stuff in order to do it. But the fact is that if you do it, it's incredibly rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I want more people to be able to do it. Because in 30 years, we're going to look back and say it's not the same that it was 30 years ago. But I don't want that to be a bad thing.
Yeah. You just want it to get better and better.
Yeah. I mean, I get the Big Brother fear thing. But if you had a database that could tell you that, all of these boats were traveling on all these vectors, well, now you can start doing things like opening up moorings ahead of time.
Where do we need more moorings?
Yeah.
Where do we need to encourage people to go that aren't being visited?
So if we had this automated system and we suddenly started gathering statistics, I see huge opportunities. I see there being the problem of there are some small group of people who want to be able to stay in one place and won't be able to anymore the same way.
But then they should be getting a mooring anyway. In all.
But for the rest of us, for the ones who are moving around, and right now, in a certain extent, are paying a tax in just time spent thinking and cogitating and arguing about things, about something that could be eliminated, really, by setting up an automated system. And also, I love the idea of, can you imagine driving up and there being just, a post at the side of the thing that right now says you can stay here for 24 hours. And then as demand decreases, it says 48, 60, 72.
It knows how many boats are on the waterway moving in one direction.
And how many are going to be arriving in the next 3 days.
And then you can tap into that resource because you're at a junction. You don't know which way to go.
Yeah.
Well, this canal's heavily used at the moment. This canal is really quiet. Oh, well, I can't have a quiet one.
And and if you could see that in somewhat real time, if you could book, a mooring space ahead of time in busier areas, if you could, just the idea of being able to plan a route. Yeah. I mean, right now you can plan the route really quite well, but you can't plan for traffic. And the fact that this whole thing, it sounds expensive, but the reality is that, and this is again my sort of area of interest sort of thing, but the reality is that now, it's not. There's a lot of ways we can offload costs onto, IT costs especially, onto, the cloud providers.
There's an initial outlay, an initial investment, but then you need to offset that in the time saved from, people walking up and down the towpath and people dealing with licensing disputes and all of that.
Yeah, all sorts of things that right now are just costly overhead without advantage.
We hope you found this discussion interesting and didn't get bored of us rabbiting on.
Yeah.
If there's anything else you'd like us to discuss, let us know. And
here's some shots of George running around in some snow.
I was going to do them at the beginning.
Oh, here's some more shots of George running around in the snow.
And thanks for watching.
Thank you very much. It's beautiful. We have the Young Goozler's Rest Cafe covered in a sheet of snow. We have water covered in a sheet of snow. We have Braunston covered in a sheet of snow. We have a dog who occasionally disappears. And somewhere there's a ball. Yeah, should I get on my gentleman's pants and my sunglasses?
Why?
Because that's what I was wearing last time. I just met the cutest puppy, but he's not as cute as you, George.
Oh, you stink.
He's a smelly, smelly dog. Oh, he's wearing his noisemaker. What did we learn last time? Take off the noisemaker. Noisemaker off. Oh, George, you're naked. That's gotta be embarrassing. Oh, so embarrassing.
What's that?
But apparently the dog's got a burr or something. But she's lost focus, people.
But also, I can't understand why. I mean, I'm sure people do, and it's personal choice. But why you would buy a boat and
that's pure rugby. forgot to put the water in.
Michael's just drunk pure cordial. People always seem to be okay. People often seem to be people that pay.
They thought that I was an idiot.
Did they?
No, but you know, she should be here. She's so cute. And you get paid X amount of dollars.
Pounds.
Pounds. Sorry. You're a licensor, a licensee, a license holder